Hi, I'm Anthony Originello, CEO of the Chartered Professionals in Human Resources for BC and Yukon. We represent more than 8,000 members, and as the organization dedicated to advancing the HR profession through education, advocacy, awareness, professional development, as well as our recognized and impactful CPHR designation, we are proud to be a sponsor of this show. We have been the voice of the HR profession since 1942. Learn more about us at cphrbc.ca.
In this edition of Careers That Matter, I'm joined by Robin Junger, an Indigenous expert and lawyer with McMillan LLP. Robin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
What exactly is your job?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Really, it's to help people that are struggling to get projects developed in a manner that is sustainable, to work their way through the regulatory process, to try and develop workable agreements with local Indigenous groups, try and make things happen in a way that minimizes discord between developers and communities wherever possible, and where it is not possible, to help people that find themselves in those difficult positions.
And you're doing that within the structure of a legal framework, correct? Like, you're a lawyer.
I'm a lawyer, absolutely, yeah. I mean, my background basically is administrative law. At heart, I'm an administrative law lawyer, and I practice in the areas of environmental law and Indigenous law. Very much of it is holding governments account to say, look, whether you're in politically sensitive situations or not, there are certain rules about how statutory decision-making has to happen, fair process, adherence to certain standards, and those have to be applied, and we often invoke those in the course of our work.
So in the course of your day, what are the kinds of activities that you undertake that allow you to be able to deliver the service promise that you give to your clients?
Often it's given advice to people about how to engage with Indigenous groups in a way that hopefully gets everybody on side. That's always the best outcome. And sometimes it's, a bit of the law, but often it's much more practical. I mean, I was a chief treaty negotiator for a while. I negotiated a deal for 4,000 acres around the Roberts Bank terminal lands. When I got that job, I said to my wife, could you please go to Zeller and get me some rubber boots, because I need to get out there in the field with the farmers and the First Nations, start talking to people. So you end up talking to a lot of different people. You try and bring a very practical perspective to things. In my particular case, in my experience, I rely heavily on my understanding of how government works, because I've worked in and with government for decades now. I was a deputy minister for a period of time. I was chief treaty negotiator. I ran the environmental assessment office, and so I have hopefully some helpful insights to people. So I try and help them position themselves in a way that tries to get things done, but it's not always easy, I'll tell you.
So is the majority of your day then interacting with clients, or are you researching and developing?
No. There's a basic set of legal principles that me and others practicing this area understand, I think, pretty well. They're not changing that fast. It's an area where you have to know the law as a precondition to give that advice, but 95% of it is giving like day-to-day practical advice, helping draft letters, how to respond to First Nations. Sometimes we act for First Nations. Sometimes we negotiate for First Nations involved in complex commercial deals where they've decided to become 50% equity partners in an energy project, for example. So it's very hands-on, talking to people. A lot of it is relationship, based, and making sure people communicate things in a way that is more likely to go well, not poorly. Communication is a huge part of it. The law is a precondition to doing it, but it is not, I think, what most people would think, where you're poring over the legal briefs. Sometimes we're involved in litigation, and I'll often work more behind the scenes with our litigation team, and I will draft, legal arguments and develop legal strategies. But a lot of it, again, is just really how you can communicate with people, manage clients, understand their interests, not just their legal interests, but really what matters to them, and try and help them.
So as you move towards agreement, though, documents must be produced. Do you have a team that sort of works with you to say, okay, this is what's been agreed upon, so that you're not having to spend the time doing that, you're actually doing the work where you bring the greatest value?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, sometimes I will be directly involved in the negotiations, and sometimes there's others around that help. And it's not, we are definitely a team. One of my colleagues, Sharon Singh, recently joined our firm. She does a lot of this work as well, very experienced lawyer. But you can't delegate too much. It really is often the judgment that comes over time that's of value to the client, not so much the drafting. There's a million precedents out there. People will say this is industry standard. There's no such thing. And clients really need to know, look, can we live with this? How can we improve this? How can we sell this across the table? It's a little bit different, I would say, than, commercial drafting.
Do you get to maintain sort of office hours, or with the volume of work that you must be dealing with right now, does it become quite an all-consuming job?
I feel that I have always managed to keep a pretty good work-life balance, even though that doesn't mean on any given day or week it's always peachy, right? But I know a lot of people that work awfully hard at two jobs just trying to get by, and they just do what they got to do. I joke that having a practice like mine is the ability to work whenever somebody asks you to. You don't always have complete control, but you also have a fair bit of freedom. And, if you're not busy in one particular afternoon or need to take the time, nobody's breathing down your neck. But on the other hand, your clients just care about the deliverables. They don't care, were you really busy last night working till midnight for another client? They don't care. They're not rude. But if you want to serve your client, you just need to solve their problem in the morning. So overall, I find it's been a good, it's been a good career for me. It can definitely be hard, especially on young people. But when I started out, I used to think I would never want to be a lawyer because I heard all those horror stories. And then I realized, no, you know what? It doesn't have to be that bad. If you do good work that people trust, you don't have to work 16-hour days.
Well, let's go back to where you started out. Where did you go to university?
I started at University of Calgary, and then I wrote the LSAT because a buddy was writing the LSAT, and I said, oh, it doesn't look that hard. He said, it's really hard. It doesn't look that hard. And I wrote it with really no plans of being a lawyer, but I just thought I'd try it. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I got a good LSAT score, so I started getting scholarship offers at law schools, and I didn't really have much money. I was putting myself through school. I said, well, why don't I try law school? So if nothing else, I'll use the credits towards my bachelor's degree. So I went to UBC, started law school, found out actually I quite liked it, and I met a lot of great people. And then I did an exchange program during that at the University of California, Hastings College of Law in San Francisco. And then after that, I did a master's in law at Harvard. I was fortunate enough to get in to Harvard and had a fantastic experience there.
So you leave Harvard. Where'd you go? Like you graduate, you're now a lawyer, but you still have to come back to Canada and pass exams and be given the right to practice. Where did you wind up practicing?
So after I completed my law degree from UBC, I spent a year working with the BC Court of Appeal as a law clerk, which is just a great experience. I really encourage any young lawyers that are thinking about it to get that opportunity to see how the judiciary works and thinks, and to be able to argue cases with them and do research for the judges. It was a tremendous privilege, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And then that didn't quite give me all of what I needed to qualify to be a practicing lawyer. I still needed to do some time articling. So I spent, I think it was 4.5 months in the Ministry of Attorney General, where I completed my articles and then got called to the bar. And then immediately after getting called to the bar, I didn't practice law immediately. We had a lot of student debt. We had a baby, and I said I can't get by and on the salary of a starting lawyer at the Attorney General at the time. So I did a couple different jobs. I worked in the Intergovernmental Relations branch of the Premier's office for a period of time on international matters, international things like the NAFTA Side Accord, Pacific Salmon Treaty. I did some federal provincial fishery stuff. I worked with the Ombudsman, where I learned just a heck of a lot about how government works. But then I eventually went back, decided to practice law, and I ran my own little business for probably a decade. And the majority of it was work for the province. I found that the province had a profound need for people that could understand the legal issues, but also go out and work with people and, industry groups. And, my biggest file that I ever got hired by the government at the time was the condition of the deputy minister was I will need a lawyer who's not too much like a lawyer. So that's how I got that one. So I just ended up doing a bunch of that stuff. And once you produce something for a government, one ministry will say, hey, you should use this guy. And so I dealt with everything from, tree fruits to disputes between optometrists and ophthalmologists to organic regulation. I mean, you name it, all over the map.
So you say you had your own practice for 10 years. What did you do after that?
I was given an opportunity to come into the provincial government. I worked a few years, as I mentioned, then I went and did my own thing. And I got a phone call one day asking if I would apply for a job, a deputy minister level job in the provincial government. I hadn't thought about it. I mean, it wasn't on my radar to go back into government. But I thought, I don't get those calls very often, probably get one in my life. So I thought I should at least, do that, have that discussion, see where it leads. And as a result of that, it was for a different job, but I ended up getting hired to run the BC Environmental Assessment Office, which was a perfect mix of administrative, environmental, Aboriginal law. And, it was a great opportunity for me. It was a growth experience leading a group of people of that size. And we had about $80 billion worth of projects. And these were challenging times because people didn't really know how do you find your way through these HIDA tests, and these are sensitive issues. And I said, look, here's what we'll do. We'll be transparent with everybody. We'll articulate the HIDA test. We will not be dissuaded from doing our jobs, and I'll make sure that everybody is treated respectfully and that you treat people respectfully. And it was a great experience. It was a great experience. And then I thought about going back into private practice. And before I did, the Premier's deputy said, look, before you go, I was wondering if you would, come over and help work in the Premier's office to do the Clean Energy Act, to develop the Clean Energy Act. And I thought, geez, how often do you get a chance like that? So I said, okay, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. I'll do it. And we did that. And then I was going to go back to private practice again. And the Premier's deputy said, oh, one more thing. I'd appreciate if you would come run the Ministry of Energy, Mines and Petroleum Resources. And I thought, gosh, it's a great opportunity. So I did that. And I said at the time, I'd do it for 3 to 5 years coming back into government. And I think I ended up at 3-4 years, something like that, and went back into private practice on good terms, having, I'm glad I'm not working in government right now, generally, not just a particular government. But at the same time, my time in government was really important to the development of my career, and I enjoyed it, and I have nothing bad to say about my time in government.
Well, you mentioned also that you were a treaty negotiator, so where did that fit in?
So after I did that deal around the Roberts Bank lands in Tsawwassen, that ended up being essentially the land package for the Tsawwassen deal, the Tsawwassen Treaty that followed a few years later. And so I got a phone call from the Deputy Minister of Indigenous Relations. I think they called it treaty negotiations at the time, and said, we'd like you to come in and work as a chief treaty negotiator on the Klekley-Tenay agreements happening up in Prince George. And I was not an employee of the government. I was a contractor. I was sort of not one of the regulars, so to speak. And I came in with, I think, a little bit of a different perspective, and certainly being a lawyer helps, but I also had a lot to learn. And so it was a great opportunity. And I had a really good team of people that worked around me, and I learned some tremendous things that have influenced my career throughout. Like a couple of great stories I have from that one. The first thing I did when I got that appointment was phone Chief Barry Seymour of the Klekley-Tenay and ask if he'd be kind enough to show me around his community before we started doing negotiations. And it was awesome. And he did that. And I went to his house and met his wife. And, you sit at the table negotiating for a couple of years. It's just awfully nice to know someone on a personal level. And we kept that relationship throughout those negotiations. And then I had this other great experience as a treaty negotiator where there had been a perception in the community that our government had canceled a meeting with the elders. And it was a sore point. I didn't understand why. I don't think it was actually canceled. I think it was a miscommunication, but I don't know. It doesn't matter. So the elders committee was very angry at us. So I said, well, let's go meet with the elders committee. I said, well, you might get an earful. I said, no, that's okay. That's okay. So I went and met with them, and I was just honest. And I said, I don't believe that this was canceled, but in any case, it certainly wasn't, out of disrespect. And if there was any of that, we apologize. And I just want to get on with business here. And there was an elderly Clay-Tenay lady who started waving her finger at me like this, young man. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. All right, I'm going to take it. And she said, I have something to say to you, young man. I want you to know that you're the first white person who's ever said Clay-Tenay properly. And I went, we got a deal. That day, I knew it. I knew that day that by establishing that relationship, we had changed the vibe in the community, that we had a much higher prospect of getting an agreement in principle, and we did. So it was a great experience. I'm privileged to have had the chance.
As you're telling that story, I'm reminded of a conversation that I recorded quite a number of years ago with Perry Bellegarde when he was the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. And he was talking about the value of relationships. And he said, if you can't build relationships, you can't build anything. And that he's so right. And you're once again confirming that. But you've also said that in the course of your career, that's been an essential element, your ability to connect with people and to work towards common goals. If you were looking at a young person who's going, gee, Robin, I like where you're at and I want to follow a similar kind of path. Of course, it can't be the same circumstances. What would you say is the most important personal attribute that you think has played a role in your success?
So I should make a comment in relation to your prior point. I think that's all true, and I do believe that relationships are essential and have been integral to my ability to get wherever I have in a career. It's also something that's somewhat overstated at times in the sense like, oh, well, it's just relationships. It's not as simple as that. And we deal with a lot of very complex, sensitive files in my business, very complex and sensitive. And that could be a challenge. It could be, a personal challenge if you're dealing with a subject matter that people are like, they really vehemently disagree with you. And even if you think they're wrong, but they're genuinely holding their views, it's not easy. So you have to, I think you have to be willing to reassess your own positions quite a lot. And I think, honestly, maybe people would not accuse me of having this, but I believe a sense of humility is super, super important. Things will carry on without any one of us. We have the privilege of working on really important things, but if I wasn't there, someone else would be doing it. I go to the dinner table and talk a bit about what I do, and they roll their eyes like, yeah, whatever, pops. So just to kind of keep things in perspective, and also in terms of a young lawyer looking to move forward, if you wanted to do this type of work, I would say the most important thing is understanding administrative law and the rules by which government functions properly, and the ways in which you can hold government account. Governments stray, public services stray over time. I'm not singling out the present one, any of them. You can go back to the Carrier Lumber decision, for example, many years ago, where the courts held that there's a lot of tomfoolery going on. And if you have a strong sense of administrative law and rule of law, it's a beacon. It will always be a firm place to plant your feet when you're engaged in some of these complex and sensitive files.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you very much for giving us insight into your current job and the career path that led you to it.
You're welcome. Thank you for having an interest in it.